Excellencies, honorable members of parliament who are in this room, Madam Barbara Khalima Firi, board chair of AfCoDD, and all members of the board of AfCoDD who are in this room with us, Mr. Daura Semben, executive director of AfCoDD, representatives of the African Union Commission who are with us in this room, Brother Opa Kapijimpaga, an elder brother, senior brother, I didn't see him in many years, who will be giving our keynote lecture. My brother Jason, executive director of AfCoDD. I would also want to recognize the funders who are in this room, those who are helping us do the kind of things that we are trying to do here. And the number of them, I'm sure Barbara will list them, or will speak about some of them, but I just want to mention very briefly NORAD, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Open Society Foundations, Ford Foundation, Jacone, and all the others who are here. Distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, my friends and colleagues from South Africa as well, it gives me a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this third edition of the African Conference on Data and Development. Thank you for taking time from your very, very busy schedules to participate in this conference. Some of you have traveled long, long distances. Just speaking to somebody, Neil, telling me he came all the way from Seattle. That's the other side of the world altogether. And there are people from East Africa, people from Europe, and Southern Africa who are here. Others are following this conference, participating online. I want to thank every one of you for taking the time to participate in this important conversation. I would also want to thank Jason and his team, John and the others, not only for bringing us together and for giving us the opportunity to discuss such an important issue, but also for getting this whole series of conferences going. I think AfCoDD ought to be commended for having initiated these conferences. These conferences have become an important rendezvous for deep and audacious reflections on the future of the continent, which is what development is about. Talking about development, but development actually is about our future. So it was, and AfCoDD is for us, South Africa is a sister organization, is a partner with, which we've been working for many years on so many different initiatives, together in a consortium, working towards ending illicit financial flows from Africa, in a consortium working on the sovereignty of sovereignty on the debt campaign, stop the bleeding campaign, and other initiatives. So it was with great enthusiasm that we accepted AfCoDD's invitation to partner with them in organizing this third edition of the African Conference on Data and Development on a theme that is just so important. Our world is at a very, very critical juncture. And the challenges for all the peoples, we know what the issues are. The climate crisis, the debt crisis is one of the big crises we are confronted. Inequality, poverty, we know all the whole list, and the poly crisis has been talked about in the concept note. But the big challenge for all peoples, particularly those of the global south, is to ensure that the transition out of the crisis takes the form of birthing, engendering a new world, a world that is completely different from the one that we are living in today. Because the one we are living in today is recognized and admitted that it is not sustainable. The Sustainable Development Goals are about changing this world and making sure that we have a world that is much more inclusive, leaving nobody behind. But we want a world in which the people are at the center. They are at the beginning and at the center of the whole development and governance processes. A world in which Africa will be a rule maker, as has been said, and not only a rule taker. Therefore, the 4 R's, reimagining, rethinking, reorganizing, remobilizing for an African world order are actually the agenda, I would say. They are priorities, they are imperatives, in fact, for Africa. And when I say Africa, I'm talking about global Africa, including the diaspora. Beyond crisis, it's about imagining new horizons, thinking new horizons and having new horizons in our thinking as well. The structural transformation of our economies and of the global financial and governance architectures would make the renegotiation of the place of Africa in the global economy and the relationships with the dominant economies much easier, and that renegotiation is necessary. Trust Africa is a Pan-African organization that was born out of the conviction that Africans must set the agenda for our development and take the lead in shaping the future we want for our continent. Our work is aimed at advancing democratic governance, equitable development, and African philanthropy. Through our grant making and our research, Trust Africa has seeded a number of organizations and helped in forming or strengthening networks across the continent. And it is with great pleasure that we note the presence in this room of some of the networks that came out of the work, or at least that Trust Africa is doing, or on whose trajectory Trust Africa has had some contribution through the seeding of this organization or through the support that they have given. Through the knowledge we have been generating and disseminating, also it's been helpful to this organization. More generally, the financing of African transformation and development has to be done primarily with resources from Africa. So in addition to the abundant natural resources and the human resources that we have on this continent, we need to make sure that the transformation of the resources, we get out of this role of just having to produce primary resources and exporting them in that state, rather than engaging in the transformation that is required and value addition, which will enable us to ensure that we get a fairer share of the value that is generated. We also know that Africa is losing a lot through illicit financial flows. The high-level panel chaired by Thabo Mbeki, former president of South Africa, produced a report in 2015, as everybody here almost, I would say, know, estimating the loss at about $50 billion a year. That was in 2015. Today, the estimates are close to $90 billion a year. $90 billion a year. That is more than official development aid to the continent. So if you were to stop the bleeding, as we say in the campaign that we are engaging with AfCoDD, Palu, and others, if you were also to recover some of the lost assets, there is an African common position on asset recovery. If you were to recover some of the lost assets and we stop the bleeding, then we will have a lot more resources to support the transformation and development of the African continent. There is also a whole initiative that OSF and others are engaging in promoting the restitution of African heritage that is in museums and collections outside of the continent, and the two processes are actually connected. We know that a number of African countries are in deep economic and financial crisis, and that is one reason why the reflection on how to get out of this crisis, how to transition out of this crisis through a transformation process and build forward better is an imperative, is something of an emergency for us. I'm talking about building forward better, whether it's out of COVID or out of the crisis. It is not a question of going back to the previous situations, but moving forward. And the concept note for this conference is actually very, very clear and very, very good in showing how the whole system is structured to make it almost impossible for any single country to try to delink or reassert its sovereignty and the dignity of its people on its own. It's even more difficult to innovate at the level of one single country under the current circumstances. The system, in quotes, has become much, much more complex, and it has become much more difficult to engage and to transform. There are a lot of examples that one can cite. And the global governance architecture itself has become much more complex. And one of the points in the concept note is the important role that rating agencies are playing in that whole governance architecture now. We tend to overlook the importance of these agencies. When I was at CODESRIA in 2013 or 2014, we actually decided to look at this critical importance that these agencies are taking. They become so powerful, and we had an initiative that was intended to draw the attention of the research community to the importance of these rating agencies. So we devoted a session of the Codicea Governance Institute to the role of rating agencies in the whole governance process and how they can literally decide on actually your fate to a certain extent by downgrading you or upgrading you and making it more complicated. And that session was led by Professor Abdulsalam Fall of Senegal. The solutions that we must get to work for us necessarily have to be Pan-African if they have to be lasting solutions. And therefore, some of the issues that will be discussed in this conference, including the whole concept of a borrowers club, for example, are actually intended to draw attention to the importance of coming together, strategizing together, building solidarity, strengthening solidarity networks among the countries of Africa and among the peoples of the continent. That's a concept borrowed from microcredit schemes, which we can talk about if need be. But it is not enough for the solutions to be African. I think we need to recognize that as well. And it's not even enough for them to be state-driven. Certain things are happening on this continent now. One thing that we should recognize is that neoliberalism has become much more sophisticated. It has become inclusive to a certain extent. It has a way of taking from the struggles against it and absorbing and then bringing back to us what may seem to be solutions, but it actually are binding us further into the system. One example is the way in which infrastructure built by state resources and public resources is now being given out to private companies to manage, and it's just absolutely scandalous. And one recent example is the Senegambia Bridge, which has been given to a company established by the African Development Bank to manage against a certain amount of money. So for a period of 25 years or so, they'll be managing this bridge, collecting all monies from it, and that kind of scheme is being considered for other things as well in so many other countries, where you find infrastructure built with public resources being given to private companies to manage. And that is a form of not privatization, but it's part of the liberalization that is literally harmful to the future of this continent and to our development. So I want to end by saying that in this whole scheme of things, I think one critical actor that we often sometimes tend to also not factor in the way we do things is the philanthropic community. And African philanthropists ought to play a much more important role in the financing and in the reflection on the financing of African development. The future is now, said our moderator. Merci beaucoup pour cette formule excellente. Parce qu'il me rappelle la formule de Nelson Mandela qui dit, the future is in our hands. And I think the shaping of that future begins with conferences like this one. So I'd like to thank Jason and the whole team once again, and thank you all for your attention. And I wish us all a very good conference. And welcome to Senegal. It's a beautiful country. It's the rainy season. When the rains come, they refresh a little bit, the heat of this place. But you've got the Corniche, you've got very nice places to see here, and I hope you'll take the time to explore this place. Go to Gore and visit this beautiful country of Teranga, as it is called. Thank you all for your attention.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.